Okay, Peter, so can you talk a little bit about how you got started with festival theater?
So how I got started with festival. That was back in high school, end of high school in 2007, actually. There was a wonderful woman named Jan who worked at the theater uh, when we were working on a high school play, who recommended that I get hired for a summer position. Um, and Danette Olson was artistic director at the time. She hired me as a assistant TD and stagehand for the summer.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that was the first job I had at festival back in 2007.
What was the high school play that you
Oh,
met Jan at?
we were working on Bye Bye Birdie at the time, which um yeah, I was just working as a kind of stagehand in that, um doing set changes and stuff.
Was Jan involved in Bye Bye Birdie somehow?
She was helping out in the tech booth at the time, and I don't know if she was. I think she was just a volunteer for festival. I have actually lost touch with her, and unfortunately, I think she passed away.
Oh no.
Um, Yeah, because I was thinking about reconnecting with her and tried to find some info, and yeah, I found out that she's not alive anymore,
Oh,
which is really sad.
that is sad. Um, what do you remember of your first summer working for festival?
I remember I worked with a friend, David Smith, who also got hired in a similar kind of role. If we were just basically helping out the TD at the scene shop build things, and then we would bring the sets down and set them up. And then for one of the shows, I was a set mover, and then I would what was the moving company? There was a bit in the show where some movers came in, not during the show, but during like intermission to change some stuff out. So we wore like mover jumpers that had our name tags on there, and I think my name tag was like Ron or something like that. It was just kind of like a silly little bit in the show.
Nice. How
Yeah.
many shows have they had you be acting for, even though you were stage manager or construction
Yeah.
worker, etc.? How many of those have happened?
Well, I believe there have been four now if we include that first one, because I think that was Barefoot in the Park. And then I was on it. What was it? Oh, Inspecting Carol. We needed an on-stage technician, and our director Carl Lindberg, he thought it'd be really funny if I, as the actual stage manager, was in that on-stage booth
Hmm.
running the show. So that was not so much acting as I was just doing most of my job. Uh, and then Carl, of course, added in some things like, "Hey, wouldn't it be funny if you spoke only French?" And I'm like, "Sure, it would, Carl." He's like, "Do you speak French?" And I was like, "No, I don't, Carl." So I had to learn some random French things,
Do you remember
and
any of
then
those random French things?
first I had like the second line of the show because Daryl came in and said, "Hi, hi, where are you? Hello," and I said, "Parlez-vous français?" Right? And then I had some other stuff like Sybil and just little tiny like quips. And then I had an actual English line at the end that was, how did that go? It was something around the lines of, "Wayne, I really enjoyed your specificity and physicality as Tiny Tim, but I think your super, how was it? Your super objective could get better."
Wow. Wow. Okay. And
And everyone in the cast was like, "What?" Yeah.
um, and so you had that first summer at festival. Did you
Yeah.
return every summer after that?
I
Oh,
did. I then worked every summer afterwards, actually as a stage manager, though, which is a little bit of a thing in itself. I came back from my first year of college and I walked into the building and kind of was like, "Hey, I'd sent some emails and not really heard much about, working as a stagehand." Um, our technical director had changed at that point. So we had a new TD who was more independent in building and he didn't really need an assistant as much.
hmm.
Um, and so I came in and was like, "Hey, you got any work?" And they're like, "No, we really don't need a stagehand for this summer." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I started thinking about looking at maybe a serving job, and I got a phone call the next day, and they asked me to come in and watch their preview showing for You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. And so I watched this preview showing, and I was like, yeah, that was a kind of fun show. And Danette and Marilyn Mays was the director of it. They approached me and they said, "Hey, would you like to be our stage manager for the show?" And I said, "What now?" Because their stage manager, who had been working on the show, had gotten upset and walked out on them the day before, and they were supposed to open the next day. So I said yes, and they worked me into the show. Like we did a tech run with just me and the director, and then we did a run with the cast, and then we did opening night. So the third time I had ever seen a lighting board, really, I was running one.
Wow. Um, can you remind our audience what a stage manager does?
Yeah. So it depends on the theater and size, but a stage manager really in any theater is the one who is just keeping track of everything. So in in our theater setting, a stage manager also works as the sound op and the board op. So they operate those two systems. In a bigger theater, you'd have multiple people. So the stage manager would be there with all the blocking notes and all the light and sound cues. And they would, normally you'd go like ready lights, ready sound, go lights. But when you're running it like I was at the time, then it was just following along in the script, knowing where they are and calling them myself. With that show specifically, we had a music director who was doing all the piano cues and stuff live and playing them, so I didn't need to worry about sound for that first show.
Hmm,
Yeah,
nice. Well, that's really crazy that you just picked it up after one rehearsal and then is
yep,
opening. Wow.
yep. It was a pretty crazy time.
Was that
Uh,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
yeah, it's a little fast and loose, but I learned what I had to very quickly, and it was great.
Oh my. Was that Jackie's first summer there too?
That was let's think. What year was that? That would have been 2008.
Yeah.
I don't think. Oh, that was Jackie's first year because she was in Arsenic and Old Lace. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I think that's how it worked out. So I did not meet Jackie that summer. I don't think,
Oh,
unless that's the year we did. Did we do Sylvia that year?
I thought she
Man.
was Snoopy in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown.
Oh no, the guy that we had playing Snoopy was named what? Jerry, Jeffrey, something with a J. He's a pretty silly guy. I remember he stayed out at Jerry and Loretta's
Hmm,
host home.
nice. So, since those summers, how has your job changed? Or what is the evolution of your time at Festival Theater?
So one of the big evolutions was going from being a stage manager that just I ran the show to a rehearsal stage manager as well. And a rehearsal stage manager, they are in charge of again keeping track of a lot of information. When an actor comes in to do a role, they need to know their lines and their part and where they move, right?
Hmm.
Um, and a stage manager needs to know everyone's lines and part, really, because they're keeping track of it all. So if the director says, "Hey, what did we do yesterday?" The stage manager needs to know, "Oh, we blocked pages 15 to 16 and then jumped and blocked pages 20 to 57." So then they know, "Oh, we need to block this little scene." uh, they're also responsible for, that was a big learning curve for me of I had not blocked a show ever, so I had to figure out all the notations of, how to record it in a script, especially when all you have is a small amount of space on a page. If you didn't, a lot of stage managers then reorganize their script to give themselves room to write down blocking notes. So that was a whole new experience.
Did anybody
uh,
help you with that, or did you self teach yourself looking on the internet, or?
some self-teaching and asking people I knew, like asking different actors, like, "Hey, how do you record your blocking notes?" You
Right.
know, and then coming up with a notation that worked for me. Uh, I mean, my personal note system works for me. It might not for other people. Just as every actor probably has their own way of recording their blocking notes.
Right. I feel like I don't remember how I wrote down blocking notes like when I was in high school, but I definitely remember you taught me some of the shorthand for taking blocking notes the first time that I was a stage manager. And then
Mm,
my blocking notes now are taken in shorthand like a stage manager. So it's
mm,
funny how theater knowledge is sort of passed down in strange ways.
yeah, I I definitely a lot of the stuff that I probably taught you was some of my own shorthand because I know part of it is right when you're blocking a scene. There's a lot of stuff happening, and the director is giving notes to like three, four, or five people. Or in a musical, it can be a big ensemble kind of dance number, and you just need to be able to get down all this information so quickly that it's like there's no way you can write out and then Isaac crosses to the stage right side and picks up a suitcase and then stands there for his solo spotlight. Like, right, that takes way too much time because by the time you finish writing that, they've already given four more things.
Right, right.
So that was, yeah, self taught, a little bit of asking. Yeah.
Hmm. And how did your job evolve next?
So I'd say the next evolution was really getting into probably sound design first. Because we kind of had rotating. Sometimes an intern did sound design for a show. For our musicals, we'd have a music director, um, so I started taking on sound design work for shows because it made sense to me. I was the one running it. I was like, well, we don't always have the same person doing it, and that means I get different sound files of different types, and I was like, well, this will just be easier if I do it myself.
Hmm. What
um,
do you remember what the first show you did sound design for was?
hmm,
Or
It
one of the
might have been
first?
Crimes of the Heart, which was in that summer that I first started stage managing.
Hmm.
Because I remember, so way back in the day, I never really had to experience much of this. For theater sounds, you would put them on uh, cassette tapes, and you would mark down in your script at what timestamp a sound started on the reel, and then you would fast forward that tape to that timestamp and have it ready and hit play when you wanted that sound cue.
Okay. Yeah.
And then the next evolution was right running them off of a CD kind of thing. And when I came to the theater, they were running stuff off of a CD. So you'd have every single sound cue in track order on the show burned to a CD. And that's how I inherited and started doing it because that's how I was told it was done. And it was right. I set up then my next step, like for crimes, I just had my laptop and thought, well, why don't I just directly plug my laptop in and have a playlist on iTunes that I can just play off of.
Right.
But I found out one of the things I needed to do was make blank audio tracks or put blank just dead space on the end of cues, because if you're running off of iTunes and you accidentally advance or hit autoplay or something, a phone ring ends and then it goes to the next cue, and I needed to stop it from doing that. So that was a kind of crazy working back and forth to make it do what I wanted.
Right. It's like how how do you even manage to do that if you're running the lights at the same time, like if a light and a sound cue are happening at the same time, it's like you're splitting your brain in half.
Yeah, you definitely learned how to multitask a lot.
Was there ever any like I don't know, I'm thinking of some crazy shows where there's just a ton of cues going on at the same time. Do you ever have to like create a sound cue that has like a pause for 5 seconds so that you can press it and then focus on the lights
Yes,
beforehand?
yes, indeed. I definitely developed in working to design the show. I definitely developed times where I'd say to the director, "All right, what space of time are we doing here to make it consistent?" Because in my world, I needed to know if I had a 5 second buffer to reach over and do a light thing and go back and do a sound thing. Like I needed to have kind of timestamps to know, hey, this is how much time I have between these. And then later development was finding a wonderful program called KeyLab, which makes designing sound way easier. I did
Right.
not design that many. I think trying to think of, I probably did 2 summers. Maybe it was in my second summer that I met a director named Jenny Ward. Was that, would have that been the second? Yeah, because that's when we did Proof. And the first time I worked with her, I was like, holy crap, this woman is very intense in the first rehearsal. And I was like, I'm young and I just don't know what rehearsals really are. And I'm like, she's very intense. But I realized she is amazing. That's why she's so intense.
Mm,
But she had used QLab and suggested I use it. And I started designing stuff in QLab and it's way better.
nice.
Yeah.
What is it about QLab that, like, what are some of the small things that made it more useful?
I mean, all right. So one major feature is like if you're trying to build a show on iTunes, like I was back in the day, yeah, I had to build all that dead space in and stops, and building a multi kind of playing queue with a bunch of different stuff involved a lot of exporting and importing files and using different programs to edit them, and it was a lot of clunky work. And in QLab, you can just like drop the file in. It lets you edit, starts and stops, fades. You can cut the audio in the program if you want to make a quick adjustment without having to export the file, make the changes, re-import the file. It's made for doing theater work. It's been great.
Nice. Um, here in your sound design, do you have you don't have to say a favorite show or just a show that you really liked your sound work for it, and why is it that you enjoyed sound design for that show in particular?
Well, one of the first two shows came to mind. Uh, The Mystery of Irma Vep came to mind first because that was just a very complex and silly show. But Grapes of Wrath was probably one of my favorite shows to work on sound design wise. There was just some really fun, especially the interplay of sound and lights. Um, yeah, both of them coincidentally had thunder and lightning, which is just kind of fun to do always. And Grapes of Wrath had this at the end of the show. There's a thunderstorm and everyone's caught in it, and we designed this. It ran together so smoothly with lights and sound that there was a thunderstorm, a sound effect, and everything going on, and the stage had gone black, and then there was a lighting flash that showed all of the family, and they were drenched in water because we actually threw water on them, which was really cool. And so lightning flash and thunder, and then it'd be dark again, and then lightning flash and thunder in a different spot on the stage because they were walking through this dark thunderstorm, and it was just really a powerful moment in the show, I thought.
Um, there can often be obviously a piece like Grapes of Wrath is a period piece set in the Great Depression, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes scripts can call for very specific or very period specific sound cues. How do you go about even looking for stuff like that?
Well, there's a few just there's an entire thing in or branch of theater that's called uh, they're called them dramaturgs.
Hmm.
They're basically, as I consider them, like a theater historian, and they do research. I like doing dramaturgical work, so I find it really fun to when we're doing a period piece that's set in the 40s and it calls for a police siren, being like, well, let's go and find what police sirens sounded like in the 40s. And there's some resources. There's a website called Free Sound Project where people can post sound recordings they've made, and you just cite them credit, and it's pretty free use kind of thing. Uh, recently the BBC opened up their audio, a big chunk of their audio archives. Uh, just put them online and you can check them out. And they have some really great just recordings of stuff, like very specific. It's like 1940s steel mill, uh, drill press running. Like they really list out stuff like very clearly of when this was recorded and what it is. So sometimes going and listening to stuff like that can be like, oh, really enlightening. Just, oh, look at that. That's kind of a sound of that.
That's super neat.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe it's because May the 4th just happened, but
Hmm.
another aspect of sound design I'm thinking of is where sound designers actually create their own sound effects. And I
Hmm.
know you've made a lot of like voiceover recordings.
Hmm.
Um, how does that sort of sound mixing work for any voice recording or any sound effects that you've made? Or do you have any stories about that kind of sound design work?
Hmm. So yeah, sound recording is just, I don't know, it's kind of neat. It's nice in that, right, you can do multiple takes of it to really get what you want. Um, Depending on what it is you're recording. Uh, it also that made me think of one of the kind of quirks about sound, and just like if you're recording something and presenting something in a show. Um, a lot of times, the sound that you end up using in a show, there's many times that's not the actual thing that it is. Like if you want a train sound effect, if I would go and stand next to a railroad and make a recording of that train, that sound would probably sound awful in a show if you had someone like in a train car having dialogue, because like trains are really loud and there's a lot of stuff happening, and like a lot of times building a sound, it's easier to take a bunch of different specific things and build them together to get the soundscape you want, because a person's ear, when they hear it and they're looking at a show of what's happening, your mind will fill in gaps and make stuff connect better than if you try and legit just give them, this is a train, right, that I recorded out in the woods and there's bird sounds because it's out in the woods, and it's just, it gets too messy, so you got to be a little more specific.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. It's, if you were to have a real train sound and just how loud it is, it has a
Hmm.
different effect on the audience. It's
Yeah.
like representative design versus literal design.
Hmm. And I mean, a thing even on trains is we just did Diary of Anne Frank, and I had I had turned over sound design to our friend Scott Murdoch, who is a great sound designer. And it was interesting because we traded some sounds at different points. Like he asked about some, because I we had done a play reading of it, so I had some just random sound effects that I had collected. But he did some train work in that of a dreamscape of Anne is having this dream of being taken to the train and taken to a camp, and just like he made some choices, and one of them I want to point out is there's the dreams happening and she's it's like this nightmare, and there's the slamming of a door, right, like a rail car door slamming shut, and Scott built this dreamscape sound of all these levels, and it punctuates with that door slam, and she's waking up from the dream and you're back in the reality of being in the annex, and it's the heightened emotions for the audience of that is so much better than if you had just added in, you know, a recording of a train. Like, right, it's the very crafted specific of the build up to these different specific sounds that really give you a more full picture.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, Peter. Well,
Yeah.
we've talked a lot and
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about sound design, which is great.
Yeah.
So I think that we're just going to call it there and talk
Okay.
about set design and light design a different time,
Hmm.
and theater in general, because I think this is cool, interesting content.
Hmm.
So I'm going to stop recording.